Hey folks, welcome to English 261, Introduction to Poetry. I'm your instructor, Dr. Josh Webster. Most of you, I think, know me. Most of you have probably been through English 205, and if you haven't, it means I let you skip ahead, in which case you might have to do a little bit of catch up in terms of some of the things that I talk about may not be quite as familiar with you, but for the most part you should be fine. I think almost all of you have taken a class before at the very least. So that means one of the things we're going to do today is I'm just going to kind of lay out what the course is going to be about. As you can see, looking at the screen, you're seeing the GBC login screen in addition to my picture. I cannot seem today to get myself logged into the studio, which means I can't actually look at the web campus page. But you can look at it and you'll know what to do based on what's there. Today what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go through the syllabus, discuss some things about the class, and then I'm going to kind of set you to work. So that's going to kind of be the first lecture. This is Introduction to Poetry, like I said. You either took English 205 or you got my permission to be here, so congratulations, welcome aboard, happy to have you. Just a couple of quick things on the syllabus here. My office hours this semester are Monday 2 to 5 and Thursday 11 to 2 and by appointment. Even if you're just going to drop in during my office hours, if you know you're going to drop in, it's usually a good idea to give me a bit of a heads up. I'm the department chair this semester. I'm also the BA in English program supervisor. So that means I have a lot on my plate. Just because it's office hours doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to be sitting in my office waiting for students to come. I'll probably be doing other things around campus. I'm there. I try to be there as much as I can during my office hours, but meetings do come up, things along those lines. So if you need something or if you need to talk to me during office hours, it's always a good idea to drop me a line. Just say, hey, I'm going to swing by about 2 o'clock, and I will make sure that I am firmly planted in my office in my chair, either for you to visit or to pick up the phone when you call me. Okay. My phone is listed here at 753-2209. If you're trying to contact me, the best way to do it is via email. I answer my phone when I'm in my office, but I'm not great about checking my messages because, frankly, it's a big hassle to do so. I have to call a phone number, enter in a code. It takes forever. I just would rather not do it, so I don't do it all that often. Email is really the best way to get in touch with me. So if you need to do that, email. Do keep in mind that if you do email me, I don't always respond to email on weekends or in the evenings. So if you're emailing me about something that's due Sunday 11:59 p.m., Sunday at 10 p.m., there's a pretty good chance you're not going to hear from me until Monday morning. Okay? I have a Skype name listed here as well. This class has 2 textbooks. The first one is the Norton Anthology of Poetry, the shorter 5th edition. I don't have that with me here today to show you. It's actually at my house because I was reading it last night to kind of prepare for class. The other book is Rules for the Dance, a handbook for writing and reading metrical verse. That book I do have with me. This book is actually an extension of the book we read in English 205. Mary Oliver's The Poetry Handbook. She's written both of these. This book focuses more on metric poetry and stylistic choices in metric verse. This one focuses more on poetry in general. If you didn't take 205 and you don't have this book already, it might be a good purchase on a poetry handbook with Mary Oliver. Might be a good purchase just to read it, to get a hold of it so you can read it. It'll kind of help you understand some of the things in here. It's also kind of a good introduction to poetry in general if you hadn't necessarily had one of those before. But we're going to work pretty heavily with the Mary Oliver because most poetry, the poetic forms are going to work with the beginning of the class, are going to be metric, and for the reality is most poetry was metric until we kind of get into the, let's see, I would say the 19th century. Up until then, most poetry is metric poetry, with the exception of really kind of early poetic stuff, like the Poetic Edda, Beowulf, things along those lines, which we'll talk about going forward. So the way this class works, just kind of going in the course description, is we're focused here on 2 things. This course serves dual purposes. One thing we do is we kind of study the history of poetry. So we'll actually be reading about a lot of different we'll be reading from poetry in English since kind of the beginning of the English language all the way to the present. We'll also be covering major historical movements, talking about major poets and their work. We'll talk about major poetic forms. And the other thing we'll do is we'll actually write some poetry. And the reason I combine the 2 things is because, first of all, most people who want to write poetry haven't read poetry extensively. I don't know exactly how much poetry is taught in high schools. It used to be taught pretty heavily in high schools. I don't think it is taught quite as much anymore. So I find that people who want to write poetry don't necessarily have a very strong background in poetry. So for those students, if your emphasis is mostly on creative writing and the reason you took this course is because you're really, really psyched about creative writing, reading poets and analyzing poets and understanding major poetic movements is training you need to prepare you to become the poet you want to be. The reality of the situation is that everyone is influenced by what came before them. You have to know the rules to break them, and that means it's important to understand the poets who came before you and understand that poetry. It also kind of gives you a sense of reading poetry makes you a better poet. The other thing we do in this class is we spend a fair amount of time writing some poems and working with some various poetic forms. For those of you who are interested in literature more than anything and are taking this class because it's an introduction course or something along those lines, writing poetry, you think, I don't ever want to write poetry. Why would I even bother learning how to do this? Learning how to write poetry, learning how to write in various forms, learning how to use meter, poetic meter in writing, actually makes you a better reader of poetry. The two things feed into each other. Poets who read other poets end up being better poets. People who want to understand poetry more, who write poetry, have a better understanding than people who don't write poetry. So the two things feed into one another. This class, in some ways, more so than writing fiction, and more so than introduction to creative writing, and more so than your literature classes you take, is kind of a fusion of creative writing and literature. We do a lot of reading, we do a lot of literary discussion, but we also do a lot of writing. So it's kind of a back and forth between the two, and I'll kind of talk about that here in a minute. But we will be analyzing poetic works and poetic genres and looking at major writers and major poets throughout the past, and we'll also be producing some poetic works in different forms. Goals and objectives are listed here. The method of instruction is listed here. For those of you who worked with me before, you know how my system works. Sunday at midnight, I open up a new module. Everything for that week is due. It should be done by Sunday 11:59 p.m. unless I've told you otherwise. It says lectures of the course will be taken from the face-to-face version of this class. That needs to be updated in the syllabus. There is no longer a face-to-face class. I ran that the first time I ran the class. It just hasn't run since. So all the lectures of this class will be recorded by me this semester. Course assignments will be poetry projects. That's when you're going to write a poem. There will be poetry critiques, so you'll critique each other's work. I'll talk about that a bit closer to the time, but basically my standard policies apply for any courses that I teach. If you're being a troll, if you're being cruel to people, if you're being rude, it's inappropriate and I'm not going to tolerate it. So when you're reading other people's work, I do expect you to be helpful and useful and not be basically an internet troll. Poetic analysis papers, there's also going to be a couple times a semester where I ask you to take the time to analyze some poems and talk about how they work and how they function and how they fit in with the larger history of poetry. And at the end there's going to be a final chapbook, which you're going to write kind of a critical introduction to your work, talking about your work and how it fits into poetry as an art form, and also you're going to submit some of your revised poetry projects there. Okay? So the grading system's listed here. You know my policies. Rule of 3, that's basically, it rarely ever comes up, I find, after the 100 level, but if you have a question about something, make sure it's not answered in something I've already posted. Accommodation of students with disabilities, you know how this stuff works. The inclusivity statement, I'll just kind of stress it here because it goes along with the workshops. Not everyone in here is a poet. People here are learning about poetry. They might be thinking about poetry. They might be experimenting with a different genre or a different type of writing they're used to. For those of you who are poets, even you might be sensitive about your work because all writers are to some extent sensitive about their work. But people are here for different reasons and they're here at different levels of skill. And what that means is we are all here to help one another as writers and readers and students. And what that means is if you are making it a point to be a jerk to people, I'm going to kick you out of the class. That's just the reality of it. I do appreciate constructive feedback and criticism. I do not appreciate people just being cruel for the sake of being cruel. I do not appreciate people being denigrating to one another, and I don't appreciate to any extent anyone making anyone else feel uncomfortable. That is not appropriate. It's not okay. Learning is hard enough. Everyone should feel comfortable and welcome in the classroom, and I adhere to that heavily in my own classes. So if you, I respect you as students. You respect me as an instructor, and you should respect each other as well. And we should all respect each other as human beings. That's just a basic fundamental principle of how society works, and our class will work on that as well. This stuff that we do in these creative writing classes can be difficult. It's personal in a lot of cases. It's frightening to share your work with other people, especially when you're unsure of your work. And if you are sure of your work and you turn it out and it turns out you don't like it, maybe you'll get a little bit less sure in your work, and that can be frightening, but could also be growth-based as well. But ultimately, writers are sensitive people, and we do expect everyone to be decent to one another in these classes. Classrooms are probably the closest you might get to a utopia. And whenever possible, at least for academics, classrooms are as close as we probably get to a utopia, and we would like to keep that case as much as possible. So let's be kind, let's be decent to one another, and let's be helpful overall. Okay? All right. So that's kind of just what I want you to look at this week. You've got the module kind of detailing what the rest of the things you need to do. I believe you have a reading assignment for rules for the dance. I think I asked you to read up to page 79, part 1, the rules. And there's a discussion, there's a writing exercise. Your first writing exercise, your first poetry project will be shared with the entire class. Other ones won't be. You'll be able to pick and choose which ones you share. But the first one is a limerick. That's an autobiographical limerick. For those of you who took English 205 with me, you will remember me saying limericks are difficult to write. They are, and writing an autobiographical limerick can be extremely difficult. But this is just an exercise for you to start thinking about writing poetically using meter, verse, and rhyme. For those of you who've never written in that form before, rules for the dance, the first section will help you kind of figure out what the limerick form is and how it would work and how to read a line and kind of how to write a line. I don't expect anyone to produce a perfect limerick. What I expect is that you do the best you can, which is what I expect for all these poetry exercises. Okay? So this will be working on this week. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. Otherwise, take care, be well, welcome back, and I will talk to you folks again in 7 days.